Hi there, welcome to this week's video. It's Remembrance Sunday weekend, but I'm going to continue with our episodes in Luke's Gospel, and we're going to read today's passage, which does connect with what it means to live in the middle of crisis and suffering, which I guess is one of the things we dwell on Remembrance Sunday. So we're at Luke 21 this week and reading verses 5 to 19. Some of Jesus' disciples were remarking about how the temple was adorned with beautiful stones and with gifts dedicated to God. But Jesus said, "As for what you see here, the time will come when not one stone will be left on another. Every one of them will be thrown down." "Teacher," they asked, "when will these things happen? And what will be the sign that they are about to take place?" He replied, "Watch out that you are not deceived, for many will come in my name, claiming I am he, and the time is near. Do not follow them. When you hear of wars and uprisings, do not be frightened. These things must happen first, but the end will not come right away." Then he said to them, "Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, famines, and pestilences in various places, and fearful events and great signs from heaven. But before all this, they will seize you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and put you in prison. And you will be brought before kings and governors, and all on account of my name. And so you will bear testimony to me. But make up your mind not to worry beforehand how you will defend yourselves. For I will give you words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents, brothers and sisters, relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. Everyone will hate you because of me, but not a hair of your head will perish. Stand firm, and you will win life." Well, it's hard to avoid the idea that we live in tumultuous times. Vladimir Putin has on more than one occasion threatened the use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine or against Ukraine's supporters. Our economy is going into a recession. Nurses are relying on food banks to make ends meet. Some food banks are running out of supplies. And don't get me started on the turnover of government ministers and prime ministers. It's not how many shopping days to Christmas, it's how many prime ministers to Christmas, isn't it? And we've had no peace since COVID. In that reading, Jesus speaks to disciples and others who he knows will also face tumultuous times. Despite popular opinion and the headings in Bibles like the NIV, Jesus is less speaking about the end times of all history and more prophesying what life will be like 40 years hence, when Rome crushes Jewish resistance and destroys the Jerusalem temple. An event which will feel like the end of the world to a faithful Jew. And here we are on Remembrance Sunday, when we remember the slaughter of World War I, the so-called war to end all wars, and the Second World War just 20-odd years later. What Jesus teaches here helps us to live through such dark times and crises. Now, for sake of simplicity, and I confess it's been one of those weeks again, what I'm offering to you is not particularly original. I read an excellent article on this passage this week by the New Testament scholar Ian Paul, who's often behind a lot of things I say. And he made 6 points about the reading which contribute to how Jesus prepares us to live through catastrophes like this. Now, you're thinking, aren't you, 6 points? Oh dear, how long is this? Well, you can see from YouTube how long it actually is. These are 6 really short, quick points that cover the passage, but then we'll draw it all into a conclusion at the end. So, firstly, however big the catastrophe, God's purposes are bigger. It's natural to be frightened, to despair, to ask questions, and to consider desperate actions. But nothing knocks God's purposes off course. God prevails. God has more free will than any of us, including those who use their free will for the most unspeakable evil. Whether it's the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, the Cuban Missile Crisis, or the threats of a little despot in Moscow today, God always holds the trump card. His kingdom has come and it is coming. He will prevail. Next week we shall get to the last Sunday of the church year, the last Sunday before Advent, the feast of Christ the King, when we celebrate Jesus ruling over all things. He will prevail. Keep your faith in him. Secondly, don't be surprised if we're picked on. Jesus says, but before all this, they will seize you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and put you in prison, and you'll be brought before kings and governors, and all on account of my name. Jesus prepares his listeners for possible persecution. We know that just a few years before Rome took down the Jewish revolt and destroyed the Jerusalem temple, there was a great fire in Rome, and the Emperor Nero made the Christians into scapegoats. It's a regrettable but common action by evil people to pick on minorities and to victimize them or put the blame on them. In our day, we've seen things happen in the last century. Minorities have been targeted. It still happens now. I don't know if you saw that unfortunate thing on Wednesday in the news where the fast food chain KFC mistakenly put out a promotional message in Germany that said this: "It's Memorial Day for Kristallnacht. Treat yourself with more tender cheese on your crispy chicken. Now at KFC Cheese." That their computer systems should accidentally put together from a list of anniversaries that most despicable day, Kristallnacht, and the computer thinks, oh, this must be something to celebrate. That wicked day when Jewish synagogues and businesses were destroyed, when it no longer became safe to be publicly Jewish in Germany. Goodness me, if you ever wanted the picking on minorities, that was it. True, Christianity will always be a minority. If we are pursued unjustly, let's not be surprised. But But as with catastrophes generally, let's remember that what we said in the first point, that God is sovereign. He is in charge. We may or may not escape trouble, but he will bring good out of it. Thirdly, from Jesus' teaching here, give testimony to Jesus. If we do end up on the wrong side of wicked people wielding power, let us not be ashamed of Jesus. And so Jesus says, and so you will bear testimony to me. But make up your mind not to worry beforehand how you will defend yourselves. For I will give you words and wisdoms that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict. Trouble becomes our opportunity to tell the powers that be that their only hope of salvation is not in their own might, but in Jesus Christ and him crucified. The power of the Holy Spirit comes to us in our difficulty and inspires us with divine wisdom. Now, this may or may not help us in the short term, but be sure that the testimony we give to Jesus will be there for the long run and will be recalled down generations. Our words are not just for our contemporaries. Fourthly, stay rooted in Jesus. A little bit earlier in the reading, Jesus replies to the disciples, "Watch out that you're not deceived, for many will come in my name, claiming I am he, and the time is near. Do not follow them. When you hear of wars and uprisings, do not be frightened. These things must happen first, but the end will not come right away." Of course, I hope we'd stay rooted in the teaching of Jesus anyway. But all sorts of people make outlandish claims that exploit a time of crisis or catastrophe. That does not mean that they are sound or true. Jesus and his teaching remains our plumb line for all that is good, beautiful, true, and worthwhile. We stick with that. We don't listen to alternate voices. Fifthly, expect division. Jesus says, you will be betrayed even by parents, brothers and sisters, relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. Everyone will hate you because of me. When the pressure is on, it will be on everyone, and it will come close to home, even into the home. Remember how before the Berlin Wall fell, people did not even know in East Germany whether they could trust members of their own family, because they might be members of the dreaded Stasi. They could be reported to the authorities and imprisoned. Now you may say this is not good news, and too right, it isn't. But what Jesus does here is he prepares us. Don't be surprised by these terrible things, he says. This is why it's important to stay rooted in him and his teaching. If you don't, then you will succumb to the pressures and you may turn. But if you do stay rooted in Jesus, then you have a solid basis for holding firm, even in the face of the worst betrayals. Sixthly and finally, endure to the end. Jesus says, but not a hair of your head will perish. Stand firm and you will win life. When our kids were at school, it was recognised that the renewed emphasis in recent years on exams and the importance of exam success, plus I would suggest the pressures of pushy middle-class parents, meant that it was important for the school to teach the pupils how to be resilient. You hear a lot about resilience today. There's been so much talk about mental health issues resulting from the COVID-19 lockdowns, and you can find all sorts of practitioners offering to teach resilience to adults as well. And Jesus calls his followers to a spiritual resilience. Stand firm, he says. Other parts of the New Testament make similar calls on Christian disciples. To be faithful is to stand firm. Be resilient in your faith. And although Jesus doesn't explicitly say so here, the assumption in the New Testament about standing firm is that, like all the difficult things we are called to do as Christians, we are promised the help of the Holy Spirit in fulfilling what Jesus calls us to do. It doesn't mean we won't be knocked down. It does mean we shall keep on getting back up to our feet. So how might we draw all this together? You see, you may think that I'm painting a gloomy picture. What I want to do is bring before you a vision that combines realism and hope. The famous writer on business leadership, Jim Collins, who wrote the book Good to Great, spoke about what he called the Stockdale paradox. And Carey Nieuwhof, whom I often quote, paraphrased what Collins wrote like this. Let me just read you the quote. Jim Stockdale was an American vice admiral captured and imprisoned during the Vietnam War. He was held and tortured for 7 years. Stockdale said the first people to die in captivity were the optimists, who kept thinking things would get better quickly and they'd be released. They died of a broken heart, Stockdale said. Instead, Stockdale argued, the key to survival was to combine realism and hope. In Stockdale's own words, this is a very important lesson. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. There is no getting around the fact that catastrophes in life are grim. We cannot afford to play pretend under the pretense of hope. But as Christians, we do have good news for those seasons. God is still in charge of the universe, and his Spirit enables us to continue witnessing to Jesus and enduring in faith. You know, I don't wish a bad time on any one of us. But bad times come, and if and when they do, I pray that you will have this same strong faith in Jesus that gives you realism and hope. Thanks for being here. Hope you might be back next week for that last Sunday before Advent, the feast of Christ the King. God bless you all. Bye-bye.